everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of eDiscovery After Hours. My guest today is Andy Hunniford of Orbital. Andy and I had an awesome conversation. We talked about his globe-trotting existence and all the places he lived, how it is that he ended up in Uzbekistan for the past 18 months during COVID. We talked about his love of space. We talked about growing up in a very rural, isolated areas. So it was an awesome conversation. We touched on a lot. I hope you enjoy it. Today's sponsor is Discovery Master. When you need to track projects in relativity, if you've got multiple projects in one instance or projects across multiple instances hosted by various channel partners, corporate clients, law firms, etc., one login can show you everything. www.discoverymaster.co to learn more. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the episode.
Quick time!
You don't know how to drink, your whole generation.
Drinks on the house.
Yes, sir.
No, wait a second. Drinks are 50% off.
Right.
No, wait a second. Double the price of everything.
And I work only 16 hours a day.
A union man only works 8 hours a day.
I belong to 2 unions.
And now, eDiscovery After Hours with your host, Ryan Short.
All right, Andy Hunniford, thanks for coming on eDiscovery After Hours. Welcome.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Yeah,
Cheers.
What are we drinking?
Well, it was meant to be a Tom Collins,
Yeah,
but kind of messed that one up. So it's a straight gin and tonic.
Yeah.
But we've gone with all the salad in this one. I think it's a Hendrix. So it's actually with cucumber, which is kind of one of the hates when I was growing up. But since it's not pickled in alcohol, it doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be Tom Collins. I walked down the block to pick up all the stuff for a Tom Collins, and then I get back and get an email from you that says, hey, the hotel where I'm staying had no idea what a Tom Collins was, so it's just a gin and tonic. So why, where in the world are you, and why didn't the hotel know what a Tom Collins is?
Well, that is an interesting question. I mean, who everybody should know. Everybody in the world, no matter where you are, should know what a Tom Collins is. But to forgive my bartender downstairs, I am in Uzbekistan, which is in Central Asia. So I'm in a city called Tashkent, and we've been holed up here for the last 18 months and been kind of living around the world in that sense. But this country is, it's a predominantly Muslim country, though you are allowed to drink. It has bars, etc. But really the main sort of imbibing or drink in Uzbekistan, since it was a former Soviet Union country, is vodka. And I'm just not a drinker. So when you start bringing gin together and things like that, it's starting to get a little bit more exotic. So actually having a gin and tonic, which is actually a Hendrix with some cucumber in it, is pretty exotic for where I am.
Yeah, well played. I love it. So Andy, you and I have known each other. We started via like LinkedIn and then email correspondence. And we had we've been on a couple of calls together. And when we've talked about kind of your personal professional backgrounds, and you start talking about all of the places that you've lived, all the countries you've lived, I think I ran out of fingers trying to count them up. So run folks through where your life began and how many places you went through to get to Uzbekistan. And let's see if I'm right. Do I still have all my digits by the time you're done? So I think you're born in Northern Ireland, right?
Yeah. I think I'm a hermit or a nomad, depending on the best terminology for what we're doing. But I grew up in Northern Ireland. And by the way, I've noticed there's a serious correlation between all of your guests that come on your podcast that seem to have some kind of Irish connection. So I'm going to stick it out there and say, I'm a purebred Northern Irishman. Grew up in Northern Ireland, and then went to university in Edinburgh. And then after that, I traveled out to Thailand as a youngster and spent 6 months in Thailand in a place called Phuket. getting beaten up every day in a Thai boxing camp. Realized that I wasn't very good. Well, actually, I was very good at getting beaten up and not very good at not getting beaten up. So then I moved to Australia and backpacked around Australia for a while, and then came back into London, or actually went back to Scotland and realized it was very cold and there weren't so many job opportunities in Edinburgh. And so moved back down to London and then spent a number of years living in London. And then we got the opportunity in my last role on a big project that I was working on to relocate to France. So we spent a couple of years there. And now we find ourselves in Uzbekistan. And that's kind of originally, I met my wife in London, but she was born in Uzbekistan, kind of moved to Russia, moved to Europe, and then moved to London. And the interesting story of how I met my wife was I had previously spent some time in Uzbekistan working on a large project it was a big telecoms investigation relating into bribery and corruption on 3G licenses. So I'd spent a few months out here and I was back in London and I met my wife in a bar. And my opening gambit of conversation was, are you Uzbek by any chance? And I managed to, keep the kind of conversation going. I think she was like surprised that someone actually had been to Uzbekistan and knew who Uzbekistan people were. Yeah. So I kind of almost crashed and burned, but won her over in the same way. So that was pretty cool in terms of one up for me.
Yeah, well played. So does she still have family there, or when you guys? Because you got there like March or April of 2020, right?
No, I actually in the former role that I had before I started Orbital, I finished with that company in December 2019. Okay. My wife came over here because, as I say, we were in France and she had to get some medical treatment and just didn't have, she just, French wasn't our natural language and, was a little bit concerned about the French sort of medical system because it was, it's very complex if you're not a native French speaker. Mm-hmm. And so she wanted to come back to Uzbekistan to have that treatment. Gotcha. Around about the time I'd finished my last employment. And so the way it worked, I come over to Uzbekistan and it's basically it's a 30-day no visa. So you don't need to get a visa, but you can only stay 30 days and then you have to jump a border. So it kind of worked out for me because I wanted to take some time off. And I was also exploring the opportunity of setting up my own business. So I was, I came in December, I'd nipped back to the UK to do some stuff, came back in January. Then I'd gone across to India to look at some software with the company. And I just came back. I think it was February 18th I came back. And so my next hop was meant to be March 18th. And, all chaos broke out. It's very because in this country, they celebrate International Women's Day. It's actually a national holiday here. So it's March 8th. That's how I understand that. And the day of March 8th, we went into full lockdown. Wow. So it was crazy because you in this country, if you overstay your welcome, you're facing something like a $10,000 fine on exit and you get a black stamp. And that means you can't come back to the country. So, of course, I didn't want that. And we're in quarantine and we're trying to work out what to do. There's nothing on the internet. So we naturally go to the British consulate and we're like, hey, guys, trying to get phone, there's no answer. Try to get an appointment. And bless the British consulate, they put this poor Uzbek guy on the gate who could speak some English, but he was kind of the token sort of line of defense between the people inside and the consulate. And, he'd just been given the script. It was like, hey, go to the Ministry of Interior. They might know. And of course, we'd already been to the Ministry of Interior and they were going, hey, go to the British consulate. They'll probably know. So it was just, you cannot fault anybody at this stage because no one at that stage, the whole world almost froze. No one really knew what on earth was going on. And so we were just talking to these people. It was like, go here, go here, go here, go here. And so the consensus of we got, they were like, look, you're okay to stay here. You just keep looking at, just keep following the news. Because the other thing, when you come into this country, you have to register at a police station if you're a foreigner. So if you go to a hotel, your hotel will register you, so you don't even know it happens. But of course, I'm staying in a private residence. We have a landlord. So our landlord comes and registers us. So I go to the police station. They look at me. My wife explains to them in Russian, because even though I've been here for 2 years, my Russian's really not that good.
Yeah.
And then they, so even at that stage, and it's for 30 days, we went to the police station. We're like, hey guys, what do we do? And they were like, go to the interior minister, go to the
This is like an Uzbek version of who's on first, what's on second, I don't know, is on third at this point.
But you know what? I think it was happening everywhere in the world.
Oh yeah.
But graciously, the Uzbek government let me stay here for 18 months. I think it's been now, which has been fantastic to spend so much time with my family. But the reason we're in a hotel now is because last week, the government sent out a notice and said all foreigners who have resided in Uzbekistan during the pandemic now need to leave in the next 7 days. So it's been a little bit of a scramble. We found that out on Friday evening, just as we were heading up to the mountains for the weekend. And so I've been scrambling around trying to get my flight. And now I have to go through this process of I think to get into the UK, you have to buy tests before you fly. You have to fill out a track and trace form. So, it's all exciting stuff that we're having to do as we get through it. But
your wife is an Uzbek national, right?
No, she's actually Russian citizen.
Okay. So the whole family has to go.
No, she can. She's allowed to stay here for 6 months. So. Because this was a former Soviet Union country, as a Russian citizen, she can get an upgrade to a stamp for every 6 months. So the police station we had to go through, she just has to take her passport to the police station. They stamp her for another 6 months and she's good to go.
What about your kids?
Well, he's got dual citizen, so he's
nice.
Russian. Well, actually, he's got tri-citizen. We collect passports.
I was going to say he collects passports, yeah.
He was born in the UK, so he has UK, and then we got a Russian citizen. And then when the whole Brexit thing was going down, we got him an Irish citizen as well, which I have. So he's good to rock and roll.
Yeah.
I'll send to my wife, let's try and find somewhere else to live to see if we can pick him up another nationality, because it'll set him up for life in terms of wherever he wants to go. But I was going to say, on the whole COVID situation, I know we were meant to record this a while ago.
Yeah.
And then you were telling me your wife came down with COVID, and I saw your awesome post on LinkedIn where you had co-workers. How's your wife feeling? And is she feeling better? She got over it now?
Yeah, thank you for asking. She's great. So let's see, I was traveling for work. Which is the first time I've gotten to say that in 18 months. And so I was out of state for a couple of days, like 3 days I was gone. And I come home on a Friday. I get back to town at like 6:30 p.m. And she was tired, and we've got 3 young girls and she's pregnant. And so she's like, I'm just exhausted. And we're like, she had the kid by herself for 3 days. Like she's just, she's run down. Okay. So at like 7:30 or 7:45, she's like, I'm just going to go to bed. And we're like, okay, that's fine. Didn't think anything of it. And then the next morning she woke up with a fever and a cough. And I was like, uh-oh. So the earliest test we could get her was 48 hours later. It was on Monday morning. So by the whole weekend, she had like a, low-grade fever, chills. She was in bed 80% of the time. She had the cough. And I was like, you definitely have it, right? So the test came back, rapid test came back within 20 minutes. It's positive, locked down, And then, so by the grace of God, by the time her symptoms really ended, which was Tuesday. So she had 4 days of pretty mild symptoms, I would say, flu-like symptoms. but nothing really severe, nothing really worrisome. By the time she started feeling better, I had a slight headache and I had some, I didn't have a fever, but I had brain fog. I couldn't complete a thought, So she got better. And then I had 48 hours where I basically felt like I had seasonal allergies. And then I was fine. And then within a day or two of me being fine, we both lost our smell, it's the weirdest thing. Like, you don't think about it, but it affects like your ability to cook, right? Or a silver lining, changing the diapers now is not as painful as it was.
Yeah, like that works.
So we're both we're good. We're obviously lucky, all things considered, that hospitalization was never a serious concern. There was never breathing difficulties. But yeah, we're good. Thanks for asking. Sorry, say that again.
Did you have it then?
Yeah. So I came down I still can't smell anything, which really kind of inhibits some of the enjoyment of this gin and tonic, is that I can, the taste is dulled because the smell is gone.
Yeah, well, look, I was in the same situation. It happened to me last October, and I kind of live a very hermit-like life here. In the morning, because I'm a few hours ahead of Europe, and because we primarily work in Europe and the US, so we're 4 hours ahead of Europe. So I get up in the morning and have some breakfast, get my son to school, and then I go to the gym. I walk to the gym. It's 3 kilometers. I do an exercise, and then I walk home. It's 3 kilometers. And then I kind of get ready to do some work. And I had the same situation where my taste just went. And it was like literally I could be shoveling sand or something into my mouth. And no texture. And I said to my wife, this is really weird. I have got no sense of taste, but I felt okay. And I was like, what is the situation? And I went to the gym that day and I finished my workout and I was walking home and I just started to go into slow motion. So it usually takes me 30 minutes to walk home, and it was like 45 minutes for me to get home. Yeah. And I said to my wife, wow, I'm feeling a bit weird. I've got some work to do. So I did a little bit of work for an hour. And then I said to my wife, I'm just feeling really odd. So I'm just going to lie down and sort of sleep. And that was it. I kind of slept it off that day. And then I woke up the next day and I was fine. And we were flying to Dubai at the end of the week. And for a sneaky little holiday, even though, and to do some business development, even though I'm quarantined in a country that can't move. But my wife went to the airport a few times and we were assured that we could nip out and nip back. So I like that. But we had the COVID test before we flew, and I went and did the COVID test and it came out positive, and it was like, wow, that was crazy. And so that was me having COVID. But fortunately, my wife, my son, they didn't get it. And it's really interesting here because you do a COVID test and obviously they have your details, where you live, etc. Yeah. And so the day after, the people turned up in this little like minivan in hazmat suits with full breathing apparatus, looking like they're clearing out a nuclear, some nuclear waste desolations happened and came to our doors. So it's like everybody in our complex or area knew there's someone that's got COVID, because you see these people live. Yeah. And we'd be looking at the window in the past, said, oh, look, someone over there's got COVID. And then they come to my door and they come in and, it's really nice and sweet. They give you medication. They're kind of talking in Russian and I'm not really understanding. But they were saying to my wife, they're like, they took my my oxygen levels and everything. They were like, wow, he looks really healthy. He looks good. This is no problem. So that was my experience with it. But, I'm so glad your family's got through it as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you guys had vaccination or anything like that?
So because she's pregnant, we were advised not to.
That makes sense.
So then obviously, come February, things will be different. But yeah, it was a wild couple of days. So all told, it was fairly uneventful. But it's funny, currently the US CDC recommends 10 days from the onset of symptoms. If you've been 48 hours symptom free, then you can get back into the world. And so, you and I are recording this on Tuesday, September the 7th. And so the US is just coming off the long Labor Day weekend. And so I said to my wife, I'm like, what do you want to do? Should we go to like a state park? Do you want to, get out and do a little thing or whatever? And she was like, we need to be with our neighbors. I've been locked in the house with you people for 2 weeks. Like we gotta go socialize. So we spent all weekend drinking margaritas and hanging out in the back patio. And it was very good. All the crazy neighbor kids running around. So it was a good way to re-emerge from society. So yeah, it was something. But what's funny though, you struck at the beginning of your conversation, how you're talking about how, March the 8th is seared into your mind. And I think it's kind of, we're approaching, of course, again, the anniversary of 9/11. And it's one of those things where, my grandfather, who's still living, he's 91, he'll still tell me where he was at Pearl Harbor, right? And I was 13 on 9/11, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. And, COVID was the same kind of thing. Like, it's so funny. Everybody remembers the date, right? When their country went into lockdown or their state went into lockdown, or how they felt or what they were doing or where they were and all this stuff. And, it's very rare. I think a lot of times you'll ask somebody like, oh, when did XYZ event happen? And they're like, oh, I don't know. It was springtime, or it was probably May, or it was, and they're very, it's, I don't know. But everybody has the date just pinpointed when this thing became real to them. So I just jumped out at me. I thought that was kind of funny.
No, I do too, for two reasons. Obviously, it was International Women's Day, and, it was a great family day for us, but also as well, I think I lost a lot of money that day in terms of, because the big red arrow went down. I saw the size of my pension pot dwindle and thought I'm going to have to work for the next 45 years to recover from that. But, that I guess that was a sort of term reminder of what was going on. But, like you said, it was just such a dramatic moment.
Yeah.
The way I look at this is it's almost like, we've gone into a war situation. And I don't mean to belittle any civilization that's gone into, we talk about it in the UK with the Blitz, Blitz spirit and mentality in the Second World War, where things were just very unknown and very sort of, it was just, what is going to happen? Are we going to get out of this? And of course, I'm not trying to liken London being bombed by the Germans as in people sitting at home on furlough or whatever, but there were so many people in small businesses that weren't able to take opportunity of furlough and, the government rescue situations. So for them, it was really a dire situation. I've got a lot of friends in the entertainment business that own and work in nightclubs, work in bars. And it was just like, are these things going to open? How long can we keep, paying our business? For me, in the eDiscovery industry, I've been very fortunate that we can work kind of remotely, but really, so many people are, not so fortunate in those situations. So it has been, really crazy time in situations like that.
Yeah. So a lot of truth to unpack there. I want to tie it into something else about your background, though, which is that you didn't start a lot of people take the traditional kind of IT to eDiscovery route, which is you too. But if you go back a couple of other chapters, you mentioned growing up in Northern Ireland. I believe you grew up on a farm, right?
Yeah, I did.
Pretty rural setting. So when you contrast your background growing up on a farm in Northern Ireland, and now your son growing up this kind of globe-trotting lifestyle with a dad who's working in technology, a real market shift within a generation. Talk a little bit about, growing up on a farm and what that was like and some of the lessons that, you kind of took away from that. And then, quickly, you can kind of tell an overview of your career story, and then I'll wrap up by kind of asking you about what you're doing now with Orbital.
Yeah, sure. And I think every time you talk to someone or most of the people, but I guess I'm in the older generation of eDiscovery. So the generation that I'm in for eDiscovery, everybody's an accidental arrival into eDiscovery. They've always got a way that they somehow found their way into this amazing industry. So me growing up on a farm, I guess it was the perfect sort of breeding ground for me to end up in an eDiscovery world. Isn't that right, somehow?
I don't know. You tell me.
So, I mean, where I grew up in Northern Ireland, it was very, very small community. We lived about 4 or 5 miles away from the nearest town, and where our family house was, it was on the edge of my uncle's, on our family farm. And so I think one of the things you realize later in life, when you get the opportunity to grow up in a rural environment, it's something special. I mean, we were in the mountains at the beginning of August, and there's a great meteor shower that comes through. It's called the Perseids, and it's from, this is where I get into the orbital stuff, because I'm just fascinated by all things space related.
Yeah.
But there was a comet that came through in 1992 called Swift-Tuttle, and this sort of grazed past the Earth. When I say grazed, there's about 1 million miles. It's in the Earth's orbit, and this thing grazed past, and a comet throws out lots of dust and stuff like this. And this is where this annual meteor show comes, and you see all these meteors come in, and at times you can see like 60, 100 if the sky is so dark. And I remember when we grew up, we were just getting to the age where we were starting on the gin and tonics, which was a little bit younger than the let's say the legal age in the US, probably around about 6. We, as friends, we'd go camping in up into one of the fields on our farm, and in that area it was so dark. And at the time, we would make my uncle would make silage for the cows, which is basically, fermented grass, and they roll them up into plastic bales, so the big cylinders. And part of the fermentation process is they get quite hot and warm. And so we were camping out and lying on these round bales, looking at the sky, and we could see, these shooting stars. And it was before the internet and before we knew what was going on. And we were all sitting, there was about 5 or 6, like, did you see that one? Did you see that one? And it's just that innocence and that amazingness of growing up in the country. But of course, like I say, you don't appreciate that. And as you get older, you kind of yearn towards, big city lights, starting to make a move. And, that's how I ended up in Edinburgh studying. And then you kind of get attached to that lifestyle where, you're looking at different lights and you move along. And so before I moved across to Edinburgh, I'd always worked as a kid, and I'd worked in a bakery. And, it was pretty hard work. It was crazy hours. We'd work from 2 p.m, and we didn't know what time we would finish. It was just by 8 p.m., we'd know how many orders of bread we had to make. And then we'd work out how many, roughly what time we would finish. And it was usually like midnight or 2 a.m., but it was just work and hard work. And I kind of did this during my school years, and that had afforded me enough money to get a car. Because, of course, once you get a car, you've got independence. And I really wasn't sure whether I was going to get my grades to go to university. So I kind of worked out that, this isn't so bad if I can do this. I don't really want to do this. And then I got then my grades came through, but I just totally wasn't planned for that year. So I did another year of work in the bakery, and then I made it to sort of university. And then I figured out, how to do some stuff in IT. And then I traveled around the world a bit that we spoke about, did some various admin jobs, IT jobs. And then I was lucky enough to work for an international law firm called Herbert Smith. And that's how I started to sort of get into the eDiscovery, the technology side of things, because I was a terrible computer programmer. So I was like, I'm really not going to make any money out of computer programming. And this kind of thing was so new. I mean, I was in eDiscovery when we were digitizing paper and making that searchable. And that was cutting edge.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of projects I worked on, we had 95% paper, 5% electronic, and we were trying to work out what to do with this electronic stuff. At the time when we got this electronic stuff, I think it was like $1,500 a gig to process, this data.
Yeah.
And, how much is the eDiscovery world evolved now, where a lot of the projects I work on are 100% electronic. We don't even have some paper. And when you do have paper, everybody's scratching their chin, working out, oh, what do we do with this paper? Because we've kind of forgotten the process of what used to happen with paper and how we used to digitize that. But then that's how I got into this sort of, this growing industry of learning and, how massively it's evolved now and how it's getting into the AI stuff. And again, learning was really, really important with eDiscovery, which is, how we got talking about, and a lot of people don't realize this, is actually the presentation layer of what you're doing. There's so many organizations, will think we'll just get the data, we'll enrich it, we'll just throw it at the lawyers and they can review it, or the AI model will just do this. But primarily, a lot of the things that are really critical to the legal team and the end client is knowing where you are in a space of time. And that was one of the reasons we started talking about with Discovery Master, was just having that, that layer of visibility and being able to dig in and drive into numbers and doing it in a way that's understandable. Because again, as technologists, a lot of us just think, well, they're lawyers, they'll get it, or, and it's the contrast of, and I don't mean to sort of stereotype and box people where you say lawyers know words and statisticians and mathematics and computer guys know numbers. And to some extent that can be true, but everybody can visualize something, and creating, there's a great saying where a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. And that's, in some ways that's true about, bringing together people and being able to tell a story. And that was one of the cool things that we saw in Discovery Master, which is, as it really got us kind of speaking and talking. And we're really excited to explore that technology a little bit more.
Yeah, well, thanks. I appreciate that. It's, the guys that I work for are similar in the way they described it to me as a layman, just a lowly MBA coming out of business school looking for some entrepreneurs to work with, right? And they happen to have this piece of software that we have the code and we got to go commercialize it. The way they describe it is kind of like you, right? Is they're like, we watched as Discovery became eDiscovery, and we didn't just watch it, right? We were in the trenches because they're litigators, right? And so then, thinking through the fact that, okay, well, I'm not a litigator, I'm not an attorney, and I'm coming in and learning all these concepts during COVID, right? Being baptized into this new industry. And so, with respect to the lawyers understand the words or the statisticians understand the numbers, et cetera, when I think through, well, how would I describe to my wife what I do for a living, right? Or how would I describe to, no different than somebody who works in a law firm, but isn't a technologist by training. I think, well, I'm just a business guy, right? So I have the advantage in the sense that I already need to think in layman's terms, right, to get up to speed. And then I'm like, well, I don't need to gussy this up or fancy it up or whatever. You just continue to speak in layman's terms, and it resonates a lot more, right? Because the differing layers of stakeholders involved with the project have differing layers of knowledge. But everybody's able to grasp onto a concept, right? As long as it's not dressed up with legalese or technical speak, et cetera. So, and I thought it was funny too, right? You mentioned the innocence of growing up in a small town and not knowing what you have, and until you're in the big city lights. And I had the same thing. I grew up in this little place that nobody's ever heard of called Yorktown, Indiana, which the big city was another city nobody's ever heard of, Muncie, Indiana, which is outside of Indianapolis, which even still people in Europe, it's like, we're like, oh, it's a couple hours from Chicago. And they finally go, oh, right.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I had the exact same experience. I grew up on acres of land surrounded by hundreds of acres of farm and forest. And then I spent 6 years in Chicago, one of the greatest cities on earth. And you realize, I want my children to be equally culturally literate, so to speak, where I want them to be comfortable around, the farmers and the factory workers that I grew up with. But then I also want them to be able to navigate public transportation in a major city. And so hopefully, you probably feel this way too. Hopefully, your son, my children are equally at home among both those types of cultures and environments. So anyway, kudos there. So, well, Andrew, I want to, draw to a close by just kind of teeing up the fact that you've kicked off this new practice, right? Orbital. And just kind of, what's the 60-second kind of elevator pitch on what you guys are doing and how people can contact you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. So in terms of what we're doing with Orbital, we really kind of went back to the drawing board. As I say, we've both Bill and I, my co-founder, came from large sort of consulting backgrounds and organizations. And over the years, we've learned the good and we've kind of learned the not so good. And what we're trying to do is sort of consolidate and focus that. Our key focus at the minute is building a practice that all of the people that have joined us really want to work for, because what we want to find is a happy workforce that really wants to support our clients. And then that's the next level of what we're doing, putting client focus first and really sort of getting to understand and collaborate with all of our clients. And we're pretty open to who our clients are. We don't have an ego in terms of what we're doing for business. And so during the pandemic, we've worked with a lot of the large eDiscovery companies because they just couldn't get their people to the locations that we're dotted around the world. And I think post-pandemic, a lot of the stuff's going to change where historically, and some of the projects that I've worked on, we've put a guy in a plane to travel for 11 hours to go collect a cell phone and bring it back. And that's not a good use of client resources. It's not a good use of money. And I think as we get back to normal, a lot of that stuff is going to change. There's going to be remote collections, etc. And so what we're trying to do with Orbital is make everything as efficient as possible, provide really good value for our clients' money. And what we're starting to embrace now is an open idea to all technology. So we're looking at the AI side, like you guys are doing the presentation layer, which we think is critical. But we understand that we don't have the resources to develop that ourselves. And, it's not in our clients' interest to develop, for us to sit and develop and, waste all that kind of money. So what we're trying to do is an open sort of business and an open platform to collaborate with everything that is leading and cutting edge in the industry and really bring that together for the advantage of our clients and really offer that broad solution. So if our client wants to work with one specific platform, then we'll support them on that. If we have a different platform, if we have a different reporting tool, we want to give them the variety and the choice. And ultimately, the best tools and the best teams and people to work with will shine through. And that's kind of our ethos in terms of what we're doing with our business.
Excellent. That's fantastic. I appreciate it. Well, thanks a lot again for coming on. Awesome conversation. And a lot of things for people to pick up here as they pour themselves at either a Tom Collins or gin and tonic and take a good listen. So it was good to see you, Andy.
Thanks, Ryan. Cheers.